impact of family ministry has. Number one, family ministry is actually an incredible tool to reduce attrition in your local church. Wherever you may be watching this particular broadcast, this is an incredible tool to reduce attrition in your church. In fact, just this last summer, I had the privilege of sitting with Pastor Teddy and some other pastors in meetings for our denomination that we're a part of, and we were looking at membership losses in our denomination. And as the statistician went through his slides and started talking about the reasons people leave church, and research done in my own personal denomination, it was fascinating to me because 3 of the reasons were directly linked to family. And so people would say, I went through divorce and I was embarrassed and ashamed. And so I just found that I just kind of quit attending church. And others said, our kids and different things. There's 3 different things. And what was amazing to me is that if you added up the percentages of people who said they quit attending church for family-related reasons, it came to 27%. And I went to the presenter after the session and I said, hey, I was listening to your slides and I noticed that if you added these 3 categories together, we have 27%. I said, is that an accurate restatement of the statistics that you shared? And he said, let me think about that. Yes, it is. So when we do family ministry for our community, one of the benefits to our local congregation is we can actually reduce the number of families who disappear from our pews and our sanctuaries and our churches. And so that is the first of 2 impacts. And the second is that we have a chance to really reach out to our communities in meaningful ways. Because the truth is that people in our communities are looking for options. They're looking for solutions. And there's not a lot of people raising their hand and saying, hey, we can help you with your marriage. We can help you with your parenting. We can help you with your relationships with your aging adult parents. And so when we offer those kinds of tools and opportunities to learn and simply share and process and brainstorm together, there's an incredible need for that, an incredible felt need in our communities. So let's take a look. Some of the news about marriage in our nation today is good news, right? If you look at this slide from Bloomberg, divorce is down. That's good news, right? If you look at it, we got from 2008 to 2016, divorce rates have been declining, and everybody's like, woohoo, divorce rates are going down. This is great news, right? Well, actually, no, it's not. The reason divorce rate's down in America today is because the marriage rate is down. Millennials are choosing to wait much longer to get married, if they get married at all. And so we see other trends that are going up that are replacing marriage. And so the fact is that we are marrying less and we therefore are divorcing less. We are not seeing healthier marriages. In fact, this is kind of fun research. When you start looking through the data out there, they say, you know what, everybody agrees that marital satisfaction is on the decline, right? It's going down. Ironically, just how much satisfaction is dropping is actually a point of contention. And so different scholars and researchers are arguing about just how much marital satisfaction is dropping, and they frankly don't agree. So that's just kind of amusing, but they all agree that it's going down. But what they really don't agree on is why marital satisfaction is in decline. They're all over the map. And literally, I kid you not, there are some researchers out there today that say, well, marital satisfaction is in decline simply because we're living longer and the human species did not evolve to be in a relationship of these lengths. So, you know what? Take the research for what it's worth and tune it out. But tune into this. Just ask yourself this. Look around the sanctuary where you attend church, where you worship on the weekend. Just look around at the families and couples that are sitting around you and ask yourself the question. Look at their faces and say, how's it going? How are they doing? Does she look like she's really being loved and cherished? Does she have that radiant look that says, I'm being courted and pursued by my spouse? Does he look satisfied and content in his relationship? What are the stories that you hear? And the truth is, we just go to stories and we say, every one of us knows somebody, most of us know several somebodies who aren't doing well. They're struggling in their relationship. They're hurting. And so if we tune into the stories around us, we know that there is a massive, massive struggle when it comes to marriage and to satisfaction in marriage. We're not, many of us, happy in our marriages. And so there's a huge need for tools and resources and for believers to come alongside our neighbors and say, you know what? We can help you. We can share. And that's where we come in, right? The church has the corner on hope. That's our department. So if it comes to a hopeless situation, the church is uniquely qualified to say, we have an unbelievable God who can bring hope to the most broken situations on planet Earth. It's what he's been doing. It's what he is doing. It's what he promises to do, and he's going to wrap it up. Finally, this whole message of Scripture is full of hope. It's what it's about. And that hope applies to our relationships, our families, and our marriages. And so this is our department. We call this the Christian advantage. When my wife and I share together, is that we have hope and we connect to a God who knows how to make our relationships work. So, what are some of the challenges that are facing families today? Well, the list would be longer than what I've got to share with you tonight, but I'm gonna share a few that pop up, and you'll probably think of several that I didn't talk about before I'm done. But let's just take a look. A huge one, new research coming out that porn is not even stabilizing; it continues to decline. And we'll talk about pornography. Pornography is having a huge impact on families, on churches, and on our nation today, especially, believe it or not, amongst our young people and our young adults. And we'll take a look at some pretty alarming research here in a little bit. Remarriage. Remarriage is having an amazing and dramatic impact on families in America and around the world today. And we're going to take a look at that and talk about some of the implications of remarriage to the union of marriage, the institution of marriage, and what that means. Digital media, right here, this thing. All of us have something like that, or most of us do these days. And digital media is having an impact in our families, around our tables, in restaurants, and even in worship. It's changing the way that we interact or don't. So digital media is having an impact on families. It's a challenge that families face. Drugs. We have lots of talk here in the United States of America about the opioid epidemic, but there's more. And I'm not even going to go down that path tonight. I want to talk about another drug that is coming at us, and it's actually started out, it was sold and continues to be sold to our nation as a healthy alternative. But nonetheless, it's destroying the health of young people and adults alike. So we're going to take a look at drugs and the impact on family. Cohabitation. Cohabitation. More and more people in the United States and around the world are saying, you know what? We watched mom and dad and how marriage looked for them. Let's just try living together, and then we'll see about marriage. Cohabitation is a major challenge that is facing marriage and family today. Let's talk about those a little more in detail. So here's the first slide on pornography. Porn use continues to rise. This is amazing. So right now, this research from the Barna Group and Josh McDowell says that 1 out of 3 Americans seek out porn at least once a month. You can see there that 6% reported that they actually seek out pornography daily, 14% said weekly, and 13% said once or twice a month, 18% less often, and 49% said never. Now, if you add all that up, 49% said never. That means we got over half that are saying, well, it's some frequency there. So it continues to rise. And what's frightening and sad, and we have another slide that'll show this a little bit, is the fastest growing area of pornographic sales, pornographic material in America today is porn that is designed for women. We used to think that pornography was just for men only. And the industry realized, hey, there's a whole nother half of the population, and they've been dialing in on what connects to a woman, what breaks through the barriers to a woman, and they have found it, and pornography used by women is on the rise at an incredibly rapid rate. Attitudes about porn are shifting among young people. Notice this slide. 1 out of 2 adults says that viewing porn is wrong, but only 1 out of 3 teens and young adults says the same. So you can see generationally their perspective on whether this is okay or not is shifting. And that's a fairly big shift from half to only a third feeling like it's something that they should not be doing. So this is impacting what's coming into the mind, and all these images coming into the minds of young people is going to have an impact on their relationships, their marriages, and their families moving forward. This is a pretty amazing slide. Factors in porn use. So this looks at age, gender, and faith practice and says, how do those all come together? And so what we see here, if you're looking to my left, in the blue, the taller blue ones, they actually show that young males that are not practicing Christians between the ages of 13 and 24 are the most likely to use pornography on a regular basis. 72% of them reporting that they have frequent porn use. And then it says males not practicing Christians, 25 plus. So we just have not practicing Christians, those first two categories, 55% just older. So the younger generation, significantly higher use of pornography. But then we move into females not practicing Christians, 36%. That's a huge, from 0 to 36%, that's a huge thing. And so when I say that this is the fastest growing part of the market, here you begin to see it. Now we start to see 41% males practicing Christians, ages 13 to 24. So here's those young adults. They're going to church. They're claiming the name of Christ. And they're reporting not just occasional porn use, but actually frequent porn use. These are our younger generation. We have to be talking about these things with our kids. We've already covered the females not practicing Christians. And then we have males practicing Christians, 25 plus, 23%. 23%, that's frequent use, okay? Other recent research showed that Christian pastors are reporting it. I think it was at 61% of them are saying that they view pornography at least once a month. So this is a huge, huge issue. Then you can say females not practicing, and then females practicing Christians. Again, notice how much higher that 13 to 24-year-old category is. It's more than double. It's almost triple what the female of the 25 and up practicing Christians is. So you can really see how Christian faith does make a difference. Absolutely. But we are seeing major inroads when it comes to pornography into the Christian community that we would like to see a very different trend, but that's where we're at right now. This is pretty shocking to me. When I found this graphic, I just sat back in my office chair and went, "You've got to be kidding." So we're talking about cultural sea changes among younger generations of Americans. So this is teens and young adults. So again, that's that 13 through 24-year-old category. They rank not recycling as more immoral than viewing porn. All right? So they asked them a series of questions and said, rank these practices or non-practices based on their morality as you understand it. 88% of them agreed that stealing was not moral. Yay! We're glad for that, right? 75% says that having a romantic relationship with someone other than a spouse is not moral. 71% said lying, not moral. And then, right under lying, 56% says not recycling is not moral. And then you jump clear down, viewing pornographic images, only 32% thought that viewing porn was immoral. And notice, they put overeating at 48%. I think every church in America should take a look at this slide and take a look at their preaching schedule and adjust it to address this new generation and how they understand morality and hit some of these issues. So, as we see the inroads that practices like pornography are making into our young adult culture, we understand they don't have the same framework that we even come with, right? So they understand things like recycling as being more immoral, and we have to grasp that and recognize that's going to have impacts on what they believe matters, and that will shape how their marriage relationships play out once they choose to join someone else in marriage. Got those statistics from Barna.com. You can find that there. The study was called Porn in the Digital Age, New Research Reveals 10 Trends. You can find that study online. Remarriage is on the rise. This is from Pew Research, 2018. They show that 4 in 10 new marriages involve a remarriage. So 40% of the people getting married today are getting married. One of them, at least, is getting married for the second time. So 40%. What does that mean? Well, that just means that remarriage, that has an impact on that marriage relationship, because if they're getting married for the second time or more, then the chances are they've already got kids, and that brings an impact to their relationship. Chances are they've got trauma and other things that happen in that marriage relationship that affect how they view marriage, and they're going to have to work through and walk through that as they enter into this marriage now with someone else. And so 40% of the marriages, the newlyweds in our nation, are dealing with that, all right? So it's not just their first time clean slate for both of them. This is their second go-round, and all of that has an impact on the longevity and the long-term outcome and prognosis of that marriage relationship. So remarriage being on the rise is a huge factor affecting our marriage relationships in the family today. Digital media, huge impact. In fact, as I interact, I have 3 kids of my own, and we have the blessing of living in a place. We live rurally and remotely, and we only have access to any digital media as far as the internet if we're sitting on the end of one couch with our hand held out towards one window. That's it. We don't have internet in our house. It comes in through our phones in that one select spot. And so that limits some of this, but not entirely, because like everyone else, we have other forms of screen. And of course, you can do a lot of things offline. So here's some of the key challenges that technology is bringing to families. This, again, would be another Barna study. Some great research here. 31% of families say that balancing physical activity with online activity is a challenge that technology presents in their family, right? I find that in my home. Man, my kids, we don't play a lot of games on our phones or anything, but if they're given the chance to play a game or watch a video, and they have a choice between that and going out and taking the puppy for a walk or playing outside, guess what? They don't want to move. They want to stay right there. And so we have to monitor that and make sure that they're getting up and moving and getting the exercise they need. 30% said that limiting my children's time with the use of technology is a challenge. And most of the parents that are friends of ours that I talk with, they say, oh man, how do you do this? We have these conversations. How do you set lines, and how much time do you give your kid, and what kind of incentives, all these kind of things. Again, 30% said filtering what kinds of content my child watches or reads or plays through digital technology, major challenge. How do we do that? And lots of conversations among parents who are really engaged with their kids, saying how do we equip our kids to engage digital media and make healthy, responsible choices so that it stays a positive thing for them. Another one, 30% of families said what my child is exposed to by their friends. I've had this conversation with my own, especially my oldest son. Most of his friends at this point have their own phone or some kind of device, and so when they go on school trips and different things, they bring those along. And so I've had conversations with my son and say, look, there may be times when somebody shows you something that you don't actually want to be looking at. Let's kind of talk about how you're going to respond and play that out in advance. So you have a game plan for how you're going to respond when you're exposed to something that you don't actually want to be seeing or hearing. So that's a challenge. And finally, 25% said finding time for our family to be together without technology is a major challenge. If you want to read a great book on how to handle technology as a family, there's a book called The Tech Wise Family. The Tech Wise Family. You can find it online. It's a great resource. And this individual, who is a Christian, actually says that in his family, they take a day a week off from technology, a week a year. They take a week a year away from technology, and they completely disconnect. So they have a technology Sabbath, he calls it. Once a week, they turn off all the devices, and they just set them down for an entire day. And that's part of how they keep that in balance in their family. And then they take an entire week. So one of their vacation times during the year, they just disconnect from all that technology for an entire week. Digital media, it's a great resource. It can be great tools, but it more often takes us off into our own separate little worlds, We're seeing more and more, instead of families interacting and talking to each other, they may be sitting beside each other, each with their own tablet or device, lost in their own Facebook or YouTube or whatever, reading the news or whatever it may be. And so digital media presents some real challenges for families, especially for those families that want to stay deeply and meaningfully connected. Drugs. They're coming for your family. They're coming for all of us. They're equal opportunity. Nobody gets a pass on this one. We all have to be preparing and thinking about the impact here. There's some shifting views on drugs, too. This research is a little older, from 2016, but they asked the question, this represents the percent of those who believe that all drugs should be illegal. So in 2016, we were starting the debate about whether marijuana should be legalized and what cases that would be, and some states were starting down that path. It's interesting to note, 66% of evangelicals said no, all drugs should be illegal. That was the question. 43% of practicing Christians across the board said the same, but only 17% of those who claim no faith said that all drugs should be illegal. And then if you break it down more like ideological, political lines, 51% of conservatives said all drugs should be illegal, but only 17% of liberals said the same thing. Interesting, it's the exact same number as the no faith category there. So our perspectives are shifting. Here's an interesting one. Some years ago, we started hearing about an option to tobacco smoke, and that was the e-cigarette, right? And that's been presented as a healthy alternative to tobacco smoke, getting rid of so many of the risks. And I did some research online, and companies are still presenting that as a healthy alternative still today, even though there's more and more research saying it's not. It's not. But look at this. This is really interesting. This study from the CDC showed that e-cigarette use among youth is rising proportionate to advertising dollars spent by e-cigarette companies. So they have dialed it in. They have figured out the message that works for our kids, and they just are putting money behind that message, pumping it out online, on the television, on the radio waves, whatever it may be, and they just keep spending the dollars because they're finding they've got the formula. For every dollar they get, they're getting a return that is worth it for them on that investment. And so you can see how the use was climbing, and I can tell you that as someone who works in youth ministry as well as family ministry, that this has made its way right into the church, and our kids are curious, and they're experimenting, and they're making some dangerous choices. And so we have to be willing to talk about these things. But these are all challenges that are faced by families in the church and in our communities. We have to keep that in mind. We're thinking about both as we talk about these challenges. This is, I think, a huge one, huge challenge facing families. More research from the Barna Group, changing views on cohabitation, right? So this study, coming from, again, 2016, they asked the question, so is cohabitation, is it a good idea to live together? And 65% said yes. It's a great idea. You should live together before you get married, if you get married at all. And 35% said, no, that's not a good idea. We shouldn't do that. Cohabitation, is it a good idea by age and ideology? So this gets interesting. The blue column there, 72% of millennials said yes, it's a good idea. 72% of millennials. 69% of Gen Xers, that'd be my generation, said that. So not a huge difference. We're only looking at about 3 or 4% there. 69% of Gen Xers said, yeah, it's a good idea. We should definitely try it. I think it just makes sense. And then boomers are 63%, so a little more of a drop, but really not much. And then it drops way down to elders, the older generation, 36%. No, this is not a good idea. So only 36% of them are saying, yeah, we think you should do that. And notice how it breaks down. Liberals, 86%. Again, this is more ideological, political lines. 86% said, yes, cohabitation, great idea. You should try it. You should definitely test drive any relationship. Only 37% of conservatives felt the same way, that we should test drive a relationship before marriage, if marriage is part of it all. So then they said, well, why? Why is this a good idea? So what are some major reasons among those who agree that cohabitation is a good idea? What are the reasons? 84% 84% of those who say, yes, we think living together before marriage, if there's marriage at all, living together is a great idea. 84% said you need to test compatibility. Right? Just gives you a chance to just kind of test drive this relationship and see how it works. 9%, interestingly, said, well, it's convenient or practical. It's cheaper. If we move in together, we can save on the rent, share expenses, just cheaper. 5% said specifically cheap rent, and 2% said others. So again, 84%, we're talking about the trends and the thinking in our nation and the community and the culture that we live in, we're doing ministry in. 84% of people who believe that cohabitation is a good idea are coming at it from perspective saying, you really want to know each other well. You need to test drive that relationship. And they really feel like that's a good thing. So those are some pretty big challenges. Marriage, families, facing some pretty tough odds. In some ways, you look at some of these slides, you can kind of go, oh, it looks like an uphill battle, right? And yet, these are great opportunities for God's people and God's church to speak kindly and gently and helpfully into these situations and say, there is hope. There is a better way. We don't have to go down all of these paths. There are better ways to get the results you're looking for. So how can we engage the challenge? Let's kind of turn the corner and spend some time looking at it and say, what can we do to engage these kinds of challenges, engage families, engage our community? What can we do to begin to tackle some of these challenges that are walking right through the doors into our churches and certainly in our community that we're desperately wanting to connect with and to reach? Well, let's talk about it. Step one, if you want to talk to people about real relationships and what it takes to have healthy, loving, growing, thriving, prospering relationships, then it starts with you, right? So the first step is to personally commit to creating relational wholeness. I can tell you that in my case, that meant for me taking what ended up being a 10-year journey that's not done, so I guess it keeps going, we'll keep counting, but specifically a 10-year journey with a mentor, another man that I met with every week for 10 years, and we talked about my marriage, my walk with God, and how I related to my wife and to my kids. We didn't talk about the same exact thing every week. Different stories. Life kept changing. We always had plenty to talk about. But for me, it meant committing, first of all, to that commitment to creating relational wholeness myself, in my family, in my marriage. And I'm not standing here as somebody who's got it all figured out. If you heard our testimony, my wife and I, previous episode, then we are really superhuman. I am superhuman, and I am still struggling and growing, and God is still teaching me new things. But I made a commitment, and in my case, with my wife, we've made a commitment that even though God has done amazing things in our marriage, and we are in such a much better place, and we love being married to each other, we're happy, we've made a commitment that we want to keep growing. And that means for us that we keep going to see a good Christian counselor every couple weeks, just to keep that relationship growing, getting deeper and stronger. And I'm really glad for that time. And that's part of my commitment, our personal commitment to creating and maintaining relational wholeness. Talk about practical engagement. How do we begin to engage our church family, our community around these issues? It starts right here. Step two, create safe places to dialogue. I love working with teens and young adults, and one of the reasons I love working with them is because they are brutally honest. You never have to wonder if they're telling you exactly what they think. They just put it out there, right? And when we interact, my wife or I, when I get the chance to sit down and talk with them, we start talking about the church. One of the things that we hear from time to time, and I hear it from adults too, is I would never talk about these things in my church. In fact, my wife and I travel and do seminars together talking about marriage topics, and we talk about mentors and the value that mentors have been in our own marriage relationship. And I've lost track of how many times people have come up to us at various seminars across the country, and we look at them and they're saying, where do I find a mentor? And we say, well, is there anyone in your church? And they just say, I would never talk to anyone in my church about anything going on in my marriage. Well, why is that? Well, It's because too often, church is not a safe place to talk about the things that really matter, right? Too often. I'm not saying always, but too often. Too often in church, if you were to say, or at least the feeling is, that if you were, to say, hey, I'm struggling in my marriage, what people would hear is, I'm struggling in my faith in God. I have lost my way with God, which might be true. But we sometimes in the church, we just assume that that's true. And so people walk away feeling, instead of feeling heard and cared for, they walk away feeling condemned. And so we have to create safe places to dialogue. So I just challenge people to say, look, if you know that your church where you're attending is not a safe place to talk about the real things going on in your life, then create one. Start a small group in your church and meet once a week and talk about the real stuff that matters, right? And just gather a group of people who are committed to working on their relationships, committed to working on their marriages, their parenting, whatever it may be, and say, you know what, in this space, we're going to talk about the stuff that really matters. We're going to accept one another. We're going to be gracious to one another. We're going to encourage one another, and we're not going to condemn one another. That doesn't mean we won't hold each other accountable. We will. But we're going to do it in a loving and accepting way. Say, you know what, I got your back, but you didn't do so awesome there. So let's find a better way and send them back into the battle with tools to handle things in a different and more healthy way. Another one, third step would be to offer proven resources. I could tell multiple stories, but I'm thinking of one story tonight. Dear friend of ours who was going through a really tough season in her life, and she joined a small group Bible study, and she was just so excited to be in the small groups Bible study and hoping that God would really meet her there, and the members of the group would be able to speak into her life and offer comfort and hope and encouragement. And so she went in there, and she just right out of the gate, she just risked and said, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what's going on. And the response she got was, well, honey, you just need to pray more and trust Jesus. Well, it sounds really spiritual, right? But the truth was, these people didn't know what to do with what she was sharing. They were completely over their heads with what she was sharing. And so they just kind of went to spiritual platitudes. And I just want to say this is really, really important to me, that when we offer advice, when we offer resources to people in our churches and our communities, we need to offer stuff that is proven to work, all right? So not just my favorite quote, not just something that Granny said when I was a kid that really stuck in my mind. We need to offer stuff that is put together by people who've actually done some research, done some study, they've got some training, they've dug into God's Word, and they're bringing all of that together and putting together tools that are actually tested and proven and have the test of time to say, no, these actually work, these make a difference, all right? So let's bring quality materials to people when we want to offer them resources. Let's give them stuff that is tested and is going to make a difference, and we know it will. Next step, practical engagement. What can we do? What can we do if we want to engage people in a way that matters? You can combine that safe place and those practical resources, those proven resources in a small group, right? So that could be a small group that meets during the week, could be a group that meets at church over the weekend and just have a study group and says, you know what, for the next 12 weeks, we're forming a group that's just going to meet and we're going to talk about marriage. And we're going to talk about the real stuff. We've got some videos, we've got this workbook we're going to go through together, whatever. A place where you're getting some training, getting some tools, you're encouraging one another and praying for one another, and you create that safe place. So it doesn't have to just be they come in and tell all the happy win stories, right? But they also can come in and say, oh man, boy, this last week, it did not go well, right? What would that be like to have a place where people could come and actually tell the real story and be encouraged? Part of my wife and I's turnaround in our marriage is we were on the brink of divorce literally years ago and desperately trying to find a way forward. God led us to a collection of mentors. So she had a women's accountability group that she was in. I had a male mentor that I was meeting with on a regular basis. And then we had two couples, but one in particular, one couple that met with us every other week. And we'd spend the whole evening at their house. And it was amazing because on the way to their house, we were in a dark season in our marriage. So, I mean, everything was raw and rough. And I remember night after night driving to their house, and I'd be driving, and I'd be holding on to the steering wheel, and I'd be feeling, and I'd look over at my wife, and I'd say, so what do you want to talk about? And she'd look back at me and say, well, what do you want to talk about? We both knew what we needed to talk about, right? We had this massive explosion. We knew what we needed to talk about. We didn't want to talk about it. It was embarrassing. There was shame and humility. It was humiliating to say, oh, we blew it again. And so we'd get to our friend's house, and they'd welcome us to their table. And we only had one child, our oldest son at that point. And they had a little high chair for him. And we'd all sit down, and we'd pray, and we'd begin to eat. And they had teenage kids that were great kids. We love them and love them still. And we'd start talking, and there'd be laughter around the table, and we'd just be fellowshipping and kind of feel some of that tension drain out of the room. And then when the meal was done, we'd kind of put away the dishes and clean up, and they'd send our little guy down to their basement. They had a rec room down there with ping pong and foosball and different things. And he'd go down there with their teenage kids, and they'd serve tea or ice cream, whatever it might be, depending on the week. And we'd just sit in their living room, and we'd keep talking. And we'd keep talking. But then you could kind of feel the pressure build because we're talking about the weather, and we're talking about work, and we're talking about all these things when both Timi and I know what we really need to be talking about is the big fight, right? And the pressure's kind of building. And so finally, we'd talk and we'd talk. And then somebody, one of them, would look at us and say, so guys, how's it going? And we'd look at each other and say, well, and then we'd look at the floor. Well, it didn't go so well on Wednesday or whenever it was. And we'd start to tell them this horrible story, how badly we'd treated each other and how badly we'd talked to each other. And we'd both have our heads hanging down, and we'd be embarrassed, but we're committed to working through it, so we're telling the story. And we'd finish our story of this dark, dark moment in our marriage. And our friends would look at each other, and they'd bust up laughing. They'd bust up laughing, and they'd say, do you remember that one time when we did that? Oh, yeah, it was like I had tire tracks across my forehead. And then they'd tell us their story of how they'd gone down that same path or one very similar in their own marriage. And when they were done, you know what happened? All the shame and the guilt, and we're the only ones who would ever do stupid like this, just kind of went, whew. That's the power of a safe place to talk about real stuff. Because we don't give excuses to each other, but we go, you're not alone. And because you're not alone, here's some things that we did. And then we move into the practical tools. Richie, what if you tried this? Timi, what if you did that a little differently? How would that work? And we begin to explore options together. But where are we at? We're all in this for the same goal, Everybody's here in support of marriage, right? So it's not, oh, he's bad, she's a saint. No, we don't play those games, right? No, we're here in support of marriage, and we recognize that every marriage consists of two human beings who are sinful from birth. And so that gives us grace, and that gives us compassion. And if we've done our own work, like we talked about first step, then we have a sense of saying, oh yeah, I've been there. I know what I did, and I know how I'd react in similar situations. And so when we combine resources and a safe place into a small group, suddenly there's an incubator for a healthy relationship to begin to catch fire, and for those flames to be fanned, and for something amazing to begin to happen. Finally, for those of you who are watching who attend church with some regularity, I would encourage you to evaluate the relational health of your congregation. Now, there's different ways to do this, and I don't necessarily recommend that you simply go and stand in the lobby some weekend and listen to what you hear, the chatter you hear in the lobby, and make your evaluation based on what you hear. There is some value to that, but there's actually instruments out there available to churches to say, hey, let's take a look at ourselves and let's just see how we're actually doing at having healthy relationships and being a safe place in our congregation. And I would encourage every congregation to take a look at how are we doing when it comes to loving relationships in our congregation? Because as we evaluate the health of the relationships, the safety of our congregation, we can begin to make some changes. And that change might be, you know what, in our case, we got some issues. So we just need to start a small group and make this our little incubator. And let's just pray that God will bless that small group, and that the health and the connection and the vibrance that develops in that group will begin to leak into the rest of the congregation, right? So for some churches may do that. Other churches may say, we're actually doing pretty good, but really our problem is not that we're critical or judgmental. Our problem is that we're shallow. We come to church and all we talk about is, our favorite football team or the weather or the economy or politics, but we never talk about things that actually matter to us very deeply. We need to find ways to encourage one another to go depth. Well, you can do that as a congregation. You can work through these things together, bring in a seminar, do some training, read some books, have your leadership team go through some training there. All of those things can begin to change the culture of your congregation in ways that says, you know what, we are a congregation that values authenticity. That we show up and we say how things really are, and we accept that from one another. We encourage one another. We hold one another accountable, and we encourage one another to turn to Jesus and find their hope and their strength in Him. But this is a safe place for people to grow as believers. All that can happen, but it happens best if we actually pause to evaluate the relational health. I know someone who recently was attending a church that recently went through an evaluative process, and they were asking about the relationships, the instrument that they used, asked about loving relationships in their congregation. And this individual had filled out their survey because they were a leader in that congregation, and they said to me, our church is awful in this stuff. It's terrible. Look at the numbers I gave. And I grinned. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty bad. But you know what? It's worse if we don't look at it, right? So if we recognize we have a challenge, then we can do something about it. And so there's the power of actually having an instrument and taking some time to assess, where are we at? How are we doing? So what have we said so far? If we were to review, we've said, look, if you want to reach your congregation and your community with the message of hope and healing for relationships, it begins by being committed to relational growth and healing yourself, right? It starts with yourself. And so that's the beginning of the process. And then we create a safe place for relationships to grow and heal and to be evaluated. That might be a small group, might be your whole congregation. You have to evaluate that in your own context, but you create a safe place. And then we offer resources that have some kind of validity to them, right? So that they're proven and they're tested. They're by people who've spent some time thinking and studying and praying and researching in their field and say, look, this stuff works. We've tested it. We have research and data behind it. We have scripture behind it. And we know that this can make a difference. And finally, we have to combine those in a small group. There's something powerful. One of the things that my wife and I recognize as we travel the country doing seminars is we can invite you, we can come into your living room through television like we are right now, or we can invite you to come sit in a room in an auditorium and we can present and we can cram your heads with all kinds of information, 4 or 5 hours worth of teaching, and that may have some impact. You may catch a sentence or an idea or something, but the small group that meets week by week, that's where it gets worked out, right? That's where you take all these ideas and you apply them bit by bit, and you sharpen one another as you talk and wrestle with these ideas and how they're working or not working, and encourage one another in those things. And so there's something powerful about combining them. And finally, coming back and being willing and courageous enough to evaluate your own congregation where you're a member, where you're attending, and say, how are we doing relationally? Is this a safe place? And all of those are steps that we take as we are thinking about, are we in a position where we can begin to offer something to our community to say, you know what, we can help you. We can help you with your marriage. We can help you with your parenting. We can help. So let me just clarify. You may be sitting there right now going, so are you saying we've just got to have this all worked out, everything's perfect? No, of course not. Because if we wait as believers until everything is perfect in our relationships, we'll never speak. Right? Because we're human. And we still make mistakes. And we still struggle. And we still get it wrong. We still have to pick ourselves up. We still have to keep practicing the art of apology because we've blown it. But we need to have some clarity, and I think it's really important that before we start reaching out to the community, the people who are doing that reaching out are people who've made a personal commitment to personal growth themselves. I think that's not that they've got it all figured out. Nope. But they've said, no, I'm going to be working on my stuff and my marriage, my relationships, my parenting, and I'm committed to continuing to grow. I'm going to read. I'm going to listen. I'm going to go to counseling. There's lots of different ways we can do this, right? I'm going to go to seminars. But I'm going to keep digging in, and I'm going to keep moving forward. Those are the kind of people that you want taking the lead in reaching your community with a message of hope for their relationships. So let's talk about what it looks like when a church applies the principles that we've been talking about tonight. Several years ago, my wife and I made a new friend, Pastor Randy and his wife Suzette. They were pastoring a church in Meridian, Idaho. And they reached out to us and said, hey, we'd like to have you guys come do your marriage seminar at our church. We said, great, we'd love to come. We didn't know them yet. We met them for the first time when we showed up, and we just fell in love. We stayed up till way late. Every night we were in their home, I think, talking, because we just hit it off and found kindred spirits in them. But they said, we'd like you to come. Well, Pastor Randy, turns out, he's a big visionary guy. He's got big dreams. And so he said, you know what, Richie, I've got this idea, and here's what I'm thinking. And so we started brainstorming together, and most of the ideas were his. But what he ended up doing, he said, here in Meridian, we have a community fair once a year, and it's coming up this point in the year. He said, we're going to have a booth at the fair for our church. And at the fair there, this community fair, just for the little town of Meridian, we're going to have a booth at that little community fair, and we're going to invite people to join a 40-day marriage challenge. I'm like, really? What's that? He said, well, it's something I'm creating, and what he ended up doing was he put together a 40-day marriage challenge on Facebook. And for 40 days on this special Facebook group, every day, Pastor Randy posted a scripture for the day, a prayer for the day to pray over your marriage and family, and an assignment. It might be, one of the assignments would be, I think every week there was a date night, some ideas for date night with your spouse. Hey, go do this be fun, or what about this might be fun. There would be assignments like, hey, has it been a long time since you called up your wife and just from work in the middle of the day and said, hey, I love you? Here's some ideas for communicating love in the middle of your workday and just kind of breaking up the monotony that it's too easy to slide into in marriage. There was others for, how long has it been since you prayed for your spouse intentionally? Wives, here's some things you could be praying for your husband. Husbands, here's some things you could be praying for your wives. And it just went on like that for 40 days. And then every weekend during that 40 days, on, I think it was Saturday afternoon or evening, he had an open line prayer line. So anybody that was joining the Facebook group and doing the 40-day challenge could call into this 800 number or whatever it was he had, and they could just make prayer requests for their marriage, for their family, whatever was on their heart. And Pastor Randy, and sometimes he'd invite me to join him, and other guests would join him. They'd just be there and pray, and we'd share a little bit on the phone for the group. There'd be a little group sharing there, and then prayer requests would come in. We'd pray together, and then we did. And during that 40 days, it wasn't just the Facebook thing, the 40-day group that he was doing, the 40-day challenge, which was amazing. And I've had the chance of going through the 40-day challenge with Randy twice now, 2 different churches. So it wasn't just the 40-day challenge, but he also was preaching a sermon series that he preached a sermon series on marriage for every weekend of that entire 40 days. He called it Love Strong. It's actually become a book now that he's published. But called it Love Strong. And so he preached his series on marriage for 40 days. And then at the end of all of that, he said, we're going to bring you and Timi in. You're the big wrap up, right? And so he planned all of this. And then we came in, and I'm not sure if we were the big wrap up because he did a pretty amazing job himself. But we came in and had a great time. What happened was pretty amazing. So the Meridian Church went to this little community fair. I don't know how big it was. I'm not sure even how big the community is. Thousands of people in this community, and the fair probably had a couple thousand people there in the day. And they went to this fair. They had their booth. They advertised the 40-day marriage challenge. Said, "Hey, we'd love to have you." And people signed up. Community people said, yeah, I want to be a part of a marriage challenge. That sounds great. People signed up. And then as the marriage challenge went along, as we started getting towards the halfway marker, Pastor Randy said, hey, Richie, do you have a video I could throw up, And so one of his posts on Facebook one day of the week would be, hey, just want to let you know we're past the halfway point. We're looking forward to having Richie and Timi Brower come and share their marriage seminar. And here's a little video from them talking about what they're going to be doing. We'd love to have you come join us. And then he'd put me on the prayer call in and say, hey, Richie and his wife are going to be coming. We'd love to have you come join us. And he just kept pushing it and pushing it. So by the time we got to their church, Pastor Randy's been marketing, he's been Facebooking, he's been videoing, he's been preaching. He's been this is a full-on approach to just really tackling marriage and uplifting marriage in his community. And so we show up, and we started on a Friday night, I remember in that church, and I was standing with Pastor Randy. I said, no, I just want to know, because it kind of helps me to have a feel for who's here. Tell me who's part of your church and who isn't. And so we're just watching people come in. He's like, they're not. And all these people from the community started showing up and just sliding in to pews in Pastor Randy's church. And he's, big smile, he's beaming, he's so excited. And what was amazing is they came back the next day, and they stayed through the day as my wife and I kept teaching and sharing our own story and working with them and talking and interacting and doing questions and answers and taking their feedback and just interacting. And then as we came to the end of the day, we get to the end of the day, and we had an evaluation form. Just said, hey, we want feedback. Tell us how we did. We'd like to hear from you. And we changed the evaluation form just a little bit because of what Pastor Randy was doing. We said, hey, okay, remember we're talking about an example of how this can work. Marriage and ministry is a way to reach your community. So we said, here's what we'd like to do. On the evaluation form, we made a change, and the change was this. We just simply said, look, if you've enjoyed this weekend, this church is starting a marriage group starting next Wednesday night. And guess what? They're going to be showing videos done by Timi and I. We've got a whole video series, and they're going to be going through this video series. So if you've liked connecting with us and kind of feel like you're drinking from a fire hydrant this weekend, we're going to break it down. 20-minute chunks, get a 20-minute teaching video, and then discussion questions and interaction in a small group setting. If you'd like to join that group, then just check this box on your evaluation form. And it was amazing. People are filling out their evaluations, and they're saying, kind and polite things and all that. And as we're going through the evaluations, I'm thinking of one couple that sat right over here in that church, and they were smiling and nodding and interacting, and they filled out their evaluation, and they said, we want to join the group. We'd like to be a part of that group. Well, they weren't part of Pastor Randy's church, and he had at least one couple and maybe a few others that said, we're interested in joining that group. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that now Pastor Randy and his church, they just went from having a day and a half with these people from the community to having 12 weeks to build relationship with them, all right? So now they've created a safe place, small group, material from people that they already trust, the audience trusts because they've already heard from them, and they've got a process that just brings their community right into their church on a regular basis and allows them to build relationships and talk about the things that matter most in their hearts. So that's an example of how it can be done. And I just want to encourage you, whatever context you're in, where you're watching right now, whatever community you may be serving, the culture you're in, that your neighbors, this is true. It's true. Your neighbors, some of them are struggling in their relationships. And if God has made a difference in your relationships, if knowing Jesus has changed your heart, like it's changed mine, if you heard our testimony a couple nights ago, if you heard our testimony, you know where God has brought me from. And you know the kind of horrible husband that I have been. And I'm not perfect today, but God has changed my heart and taught me how to love my wife and love my kids. If you have that story to tell, then you have something to say to your community, and you have something to offer. And you can offer it to them in a package that they can't get most places today, all right? The truth is that almost anything that you want informationally, you can find on the internet today, right? You may be watching this right now online, and you can get almost anything you want informationally on the internet. What you can't get on YouTube, and you can't get on Facebook, and you can't get on Google is real interaction. You can't get it, right? And that's where the church maintains a corner on the market. We still offer real interaction. And so if we are a safe place to welcome in our neighbors and friends from the community and say, let's talk about the real stuff. And we talk about it in a way that is meaningful, in a way that actually works. So when they go home and try it, they come back and go, wow, you won't believe what happened. That changed things. And then they come back the next week and go, oh, you won't believe how we tripped over ourselves and went at it this last week. And we love them and pick them up and encourage them. If we can offer that, if we can offer a community that looks like Jesus, that talks like Jesus, and that heals like Jesus, then we can make a difference in the woof and the weave of our communities. We can change slowly the fabric of our communities, rebuilding healthy homes, healthy marriages, teaching people how to be healthy parents and raise kids that come up better adjusted, more prepared to deal with life. But it starts with that journey of facing our own stuff, the reality of our own brokenness, and allowing God to use his Spirit and others, friends, mentors, counselors, pastors, to reach out and hold us accountable, encourage us, and show us a path. And as we walk that path in humility, then we develop a story that we can turn and share with the world to say, let me show you what Jesus has done for me that has changed my life. And he did it in the context of a church community. And that's when church becomes relevant. More and more young people look at church and say, church has no relevance to my life. And that's because too often they're not hearing stories of the real difference that Jesus is making in real people. So I want to encourage you, family ministry. Most people have a family. We all come from a family of some kind. And so most of us come from families that have some level of brokenness, and we personally have some level of brokenness. And there's a huge opportunity for the church to, first of all, begin to allow ourselves to be healed by the love and grace of Jesus, and then to begin to extend that same healing to people we know in relationship in the context of meaningful small group ministry. I'd just like to pray with you as you consider how God might use you in this ministry, and thank you for watching and joining me here tonight. Father in heaven, I want to thank you for all those who are watching, who are thinking about whether you may be calling them to reach out to their communities and shine the light of what you've done in their own lives, to share their own stories. Maybe you're calling them to begin their own journey, their own walk hand in hand with you of healing towards healthier and whole relationships of their own. God, I ask that your Holy Spirit will go wherever this signal is being received, that you will speak to each heart individually and call them into their own healing journey, call them to share the healing that you offer with those around them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you so much for watching.